I want to say it's a property management software platform, but it is for me, it's worked out great as somebody who self-manages their real estate portfolio. So it's in my opinion, a private landlord. I'm sure
Mhm.
property managers use it too, but last count was over 28,000 units listed, over 4,000 landlords or property managers using the platform. And so I want to talk in this video about the most common mistakes landlords make. So not all of the mistakes, because I think I've checked a lot of the boxes on mistakes we can make, but what are the ones that you see that are most common?
I want to start with the first one, which is right when you acquire the property. I think this is a really important one. You have either a pro forma or someone who's told you this is what your rental rate should be. And I say this because rental rates have been more stagnant than you would think. And this is based on our data across now 29,000 rentals nationwide. And we also have our free plan, which also gets us more data to over 100,000. And one of the things, Dion, that has been glaringly obvious is that someone will say, here's my rental rate, and they're not getting any leads. And they've priced it way too high because they have some emotional attachment. Either this was my mom's place and it has granite countertops, and the place next door doesn't have granite countertops. That's why mine's $300 more, all the way to saying, but I have, if I don't reduce the price, or if I reduce the price, it's not going to cash flow, or my cash flow won't be as high as I was promised. And it was like, no, your cash flow is zero right now because it's vacant and you have no leads. And so I think there, with especially the softening of the market, just being able to be agile and say, this is a long term game. And when I purchase the property, I can't change the purchase price. I might be able to refinance my interest rate or do something else, but really make sure you're looking at what's happening in the market to make sure you get a qualified tenant and you don't increase those days on market.
Yeah, there are so many people I think that I've encountered who, if they're in the one rental at a time community or in their BiggerPockets community and they've absorbed, hundreds, if not thousands of hours of podcasts, they generally don't make this mistake. It's when I meet somebody at a local meetup and they're just kind of, maybe they have one rental or they're thinking about getting a rental and they think their rent is based on their expenses.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
when you've been doing this long enough, it actually sounds kind of silly to say that. You go, yeah, of course that's not how it works. But it's really hard to remember what it's like to not know something.
Yeah.
And when you're starting out, you think, well, I have to get this much rent because I have the mortgage, I have the insurance, I have the maintenance, I have all the costs I had to do it. And tenants don't care about expenses. They just don't. Area average rent, set rent. So I love that when you acquire a property, uh, on my channel, we actually call pro forma. There's a technical term for pro forma,
Yeah.
and I'm going to use a bad word. So sorry for anybody who has kids in the background, but it's made up bull dookie. That's what pro forma means. There's a caveat in the listing that says the listing agent and the seller can say anything that they want to, and it is your job to verify or do your due diligence. So pro forma can trap a lot of people, and then listing properties too high, not doing a good rent study. I absolutely agree. My first one on the biggest mistake I think landlords make, it came through experience and
Mm-hmm.
research. I was getting ready to retire in 2021, 2022. I started joking about, hey, I'm probably going to retire and tomorrow or 3 years from now. Like it wasn't on the menu till then, but all of a sudden I was thinking I'm going to retire soon. But I was wondering, how do people fail as landlords? What happens to people who had rentals and no longer have them? And I couldn't find them. I couldn't find the people who lost their rentals. I know it had to happen. I was in the
Mm-hmm.
one rental at a time, BiggerPockets. These are people growing portfolios. It's not full of a lot of people who lost their properties. Very few are like Frank and Cynthia, the old guy REI channel, where they had properties in 2008, lost them, and they're starting again. I didn't find them. And then in the Choose FI group, I found all these stock investors who used to own rentals. And this is the biggest mistake that I saw across the board. Some of them lost their rentals because of death, divorce, health concerns, some one-off.
Mm-hmm.
But almost every single one of them lost their properties because they didn't raise the rents. I heard over and over, I didn't want to raise the rents and lose a good tenant.
Mm-hmm.
My answer is, so instead you lost a good asset. And projecting
Super
rents too high
interesting.
based on your expenses is a very common mistake when you buy a property. But having properties for years and not raising the rents, some people will say, well, my expenses haven't really gone up. And that's not what sets rents. Rents are almost the same right now as they were in 1950 or 1980. What's changed is the value of the dollar.
Mhm.
Inflation happens, they print more money. It takes more currency to buy the same asset or to rent the same asset. So if you consistently keep your rent the same because you have good tenants and they're happy, inflation is not only eating your profit, it's going to hurt you when you go to do a roof, a garage door, a foundation repair, those expenses that come up in the future. And those across, even Graham Stephan, who has a YouTube channel with millions of subscribers, he has rentals in California. About 2 years ago, he sold a bunch of his properties because he hadn't raised the rent in 10 years. And in one of his videos, he actually used the words, I would have made more money if I buried the money in my backyard.
Mhm.
He
Yeah.
had happy tenants, but he lost the assets. So my solution to that and where the confidence to retire came from is I created the binder strategy, like what I'm kind of known for and how I got invited to be a keynote speaker for BPCon 2025 this year in Las Vegas on the 5th, 6th, and 7th, if you're around there. uh, was I get my tenants to ask me to raise the rent. Now they don't go higher than area average. So you have to do a good rent study and know what area average is and what's going on with Section 8 and BAH for military, right? So rent just doesn't keep going up. But if you're keeping your rent where it was, my brother finally used the binder strategy, had tenants that hadn't raised the rent since 2006, which was setting him up to lose the properties if he didn't fix that.
Yeah.
What's your next biggest, most common mistake landlords make?
Um, I think it's actually when they hire and they don't ask questions or they don't stay on top of it. So I think there's often this, I can be fully passive with my real estate. And I've seen so many situations where someone has come to us because they've been too passive. In other words, they don't even check the numbers and they're in, to your point, a bad financial situation. And they're like, well, my property manager has been holding $42,000 of my rent. And my first question is, why? What happened when it was the first $2,000? Like, why? How did you get to $42,000? How are we at this point? And so I think that actually this came from the founder and CEO of Airbnb. And he had basically mentioned that the more he's involved in the details, the less work he has. And I actually truly do see that as well, even with my own real estate. If I ask why and I know that the details are there and I have full transparency into everything because nothing is hidden, it's like nothing's going to come up because I know I've crossed my T's, dotted my I's initially getting something set up. And then I know, like, okay, tenants have an inspection they have to do every 6 months or 3 months and, share what the condition of the property is and all these processes in place. So you don't have this why downstream. But I've seen that when you don't have that transparency and you suddenly think someone else is going to do it and I don't need to look at anything, that's when everything goes wrong. And so I always encourage that why with all of your real estate and to really know what's in the details so that you can actually fully step out.
Nice. I like the why. Um, knowing, if you have your systems in place, you'll know before things pop up. Every time I hear the question why, I'm reminded of David Green from BiggerPockets, who always said, anytime you hear no, like you can't borrow this, you can't buy this, or not that price, he always said, but ask why. So
Yeah.
he's kind of using it in reverse, like I want to solve the future problem by knowing why now.
Yeah.
Uh, One of the biggest mistakes I see landlords make almost every time, and a lot of the landlords that I know personally make this mistake. They buy a property, they get it insured, and then they let it auto renew insurance every year. Now, your lender's super happy. They don't care because the original insurance policy binder that they got, they get a binder from the insurance company. It's different than the binder strategy, but they get a
Yep.
binder that says there's enough insurance to cover the mortgage if there's a catastrophic event. So the lender will be made whole. That they don't care about your property, they don't care about your rent, they don't care about the rebuild of the property. They just care, will they be made whole? So people get enough insurance to make the lender happy. And if you buy a property now, it doesn't sound so bad, but let's say we bought a property in 2018. So you get insurance that'll cover a $300,000 duplex. It's basically what I was paying around then.
Yeah.
That's now worth over 700,000. When I bought it, it would cost about 140,000 to rebuild. Now it's closer to 400,000 or 450,000 to rebuild. If you just let your insurance auto renew every year, I would currently in 2025 have an insurance policy from 2018. Premium I'm super happy with. It's probably gone up a little bit over the years, but I'm insuring that original cost to rebuild price that's now a fraction of what it would take. So every 2 or 3 years, I recommend landlords actually go to their insurance policy, think, contact contractors and find out what would rebuilding cost now and make sure you have enough coverage to make yourself whole, not just the mortgage holder.
I love that so much. I'm going to go a little bit off that one. Make sure every tenant has renter's insurance. And here is why. If a tenant pushes back on requiring renter's insurance, you have to tell them why this is good for them as well. Not just for you, but for them as well. And there's certain things, such as let's just say there's no heat in the house. Their insurance will actually pay for their hotel room. It is going to save you money that they have this renter's insurance. And so, when you think about it that way of what's the benefit for you, but also the benefit for them, you reduce all of this tension between yourselves. Like if the place floods, tenants have insurance to cover their personal belongings. You're not out of pocket or fighting with your insurance to cover it because your landlord insurance is going to say the tenant should have their own policy. And so, really, just making sure that you have that in place. And when they ask why, you give certain examples of, hey, if you let someone in the house and they burn it down, and you don't have this insurance, you could be liable from our insurance. Like you need insurance for this. I think those extreme cases will really help them understand why. So I think insurance is a good one on both sides.
I cover that with every tenant so far when I'm renewing or signing a new lease. Because I cover every portion of the lease going through, right? The ones that protect the tenant, how much
Mhm.
notice is required to make entry to do an inspection or uh, anything else like that. But I also point out here's the section of the lease that requires you have renter's insurance because homeowner's insurance that I have isn't going to cover your personal stuff, your hotel stays.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I should name her, but I didn't ask permission in advance. But I have a friend who was renting an apartment. There was a fire in the apartment building 4 units down, wasn't even hers, but the smoke damage could have hit everything. Ends up getting a check for like 17 grand to cover everything that she had in there to get replaced from renter's insurance. The property insurance wouldn't have paid a dime. Her
Yeah.
renter's insurance covered her stuff. So that's a good one too. The one that I love the most, and I've been trying to make videos about this recently, and I don't know if I've done the research to get it articulated well enough yet, but I have a real problem with people who buy rental properties. This is the mistake landlords make. They buy rental properties based on the math, and
Hmm.
it kills my brain because what's the question that comes every time? Can you look at this deal for me? Here's the return I see. What am I missing? And they're thinking, am I missing an expense? Am I missing that the percentage rate's going to be off? Or did I do the math wrong or something? And you can go broke. You can absolutely go broke buying rentals that have a high yield.
Hmm. Yep. And that's usually because of the evictions.
Well, the evictions, the turnover, the neighborhood it's in, people
Turnover.
can hit the
Yeah.
2% roll right now by going and buying a, $500
Yeah.
property in an area of Detroit where the SWAT team goes, not a cop by himself. And then does the property match your strategy, right? There are people who want
Yeah.
it. A friend of ours, Chester, who's been to the one rental at a time
Yeah.
once every year, and we've met and talked to him for years now, was looking at buying and rent by the room properties, and he did the work. Every time he found a deal where the math worked, and he was thinking this could be a good deal, the parking didn't work. Wanted to rent by
Hmm.
the room, but there was one or maybe two parking spots, and I like to have low tenant turnover. I like to, because I'm the lazy investor, I want to travel and scuba dive in places like Portugal and Thailand. I don't want to be dealing with properties every day. So math is important. I want it to make more than it costs. So I do
Hmm.
know the math, but does it have elements that will help limit tenant turnover? I
Yep.
look at the surrounding area. Are there things that are really loud or have a strong smell, like a mushroom farm or a French fry factory, a dump, water treatment plant? Then look at the actual property. I prefer those side by side units. I want washer dryer hookups in each unit. I I have this long list of things where I've looked at a lot of properties where the math was amazing. and I would have went broke, or
And you would have, if
decided,
you, yeah,
decided I just hate landlording because it's so much work. And
yeah,
so, yeah, hopefully people will stop buying based just on math. It's an element. And I always say, we don't practice the math till we get it right. We practice the math till we can't get it wrong. And after the math, here's the long list of probably 20 things that we want to check before we actually close on a property.
yep. I love it. My next one, and I couldn't agree more, the spreadsheet, like based on the neighborhood, what is going on the day to day is, and that's why it's important to have a good realtor who's helping you purchase or you really knowing what's on the ground locally. Mine is very similar on now trusting people. I don't know why. And Dion, you're a former cop, so you're like me, a very much of honesty, trust, like by the book, etc. I don't know why, but real estate really attracts a lot of get rich quick people for some reason. I think it might be the shows, and also just con artists, people who are just really, really unethical. And so I've seen real estate investors or someone wanting to be a real estate investor get into business with the wrong capital partner, the wrong finance partner, or the wrong partnership where they purchased a property with someone who they didn't know well enough or working with the wrong contractor. And so for me, a lot of things come to trust. And I have a little bit more of a guard up than I used to, where I actually do like to get to know someone more. I like to know their track record. I like to know what other properties they've worked on. I like to talk to the people whose properties they've worked on. I like to know that that person who I'm talking to is not their brother. Really getting to know people because I've been screwed over in deals. I've had developers run off with my money. I've had the whole shebang of things where I said, I'm not a litigious person. I will never sue anyone. And then I'm like, maybe I need to take this person to court and get my money back. And so I think really over time, what I found in real estate is building up and working with people you really trust and getting to know them multiple instances and over the years. That will really help make sure that you don't get yourself into a bad financial situation.
One of the challenges is that, the scam artists that learn the skills of sounding trustworthy, knowing just enough facts to make it seem like here's the
Mm-hmm.
extra details that make it seem like I'm not making this up. Uh, get into real estate because there are so many people who think it is a get rich quick path, not a get
Mm-hmm.
rich quick scheme. They think, oh, there are people who've done this in 3 years where they get to walk away from their job and they have a ton of money, right?
Yep.
It's not the normal. It's not common. It's possible. I think real estate's a get rich quick scheme as long as you think 10 years is quick. If you
Yeah.
can look at it from that lens. And so what the research that I do whenever I'm looking at content that I watch or somebody I want to interact with, and I'll use examples of people that I know. Right. Around 2018, I found Michael Zuber's One Rental at a Time, his YouTube channel. I think when I subscribed, it had about 4,000 subscribers on it now. He's over 60,000. But I watched his content to see how he interacted with people, to see how he was making his money. Because he has a book, he had developed a course, he has a YouTube platform. When I had no idea at the time, with 4,000 subscribers, I don't know if he was making $2 million a month or whatever. I had no idea how it worked.
Yeah.
I think at that time he didn't even know you could monetize YouTube when he was about there. Uh, but I realized his income comes from his portfolio, the
Mm-hmm.
number of rentals, the way he talks, how he runs the math, the neighborhood he invests in, how the years it took to build it. So I was thinking, okay, if you find somebody and they make the bulk of their money through their course or the bulk of their money through their social media platform, but you don't see their portfolio in the information, they would be a guru. If you find somebody like Matt the Lumberjack Landlord or Michael Zuber or Millennial Mike, who they just go, here's the properties, here's what I'm doing on this one, and you see that their actual income is coming from that work. Uh, it's easier to judge somebody based on how they're making their money than how polished they are at the information that they deliver.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that so much because there's so many of these people who have courses and then you find out they don't have rental properties or they sold off their rental properties and you're like, how are you preaching this if you're not doubling down and purchasing more, but you're telling everyone else to purchase right now. So I absolutely love that one because I think you're right. The ones you'll get educated from the most are following their own preaching. They're doing exactly what they're saying. And then on top of that, the course isn't their get rich quick, but they actually make money off of it and are passionate to share what they're doing. I absolutely love that one, Dion.
So we've covered the major ones. I was looking for questions. I haven't seen anybody come up with a question yet. There was somebody who made a statement from Catherine Austin Fitz, which I will have to check out the name. Not familiar. If you have children, help them buy homes from Lookup. I think that, especially if you want your kids to inherit your rentals,
Yeah.
helping them get a few before, because this one of the mistakes I think landlords do is I have several videos on how I think LLCs can be a mistake. There's two times LLCs
Mm-hmm.
I would require an LLC for myself, but there's 100 times where people put LLCs where I wouldn't. But I think one of the bigger mistakes landlords make is they put their properties in a trust. It sounds smart, right? And an LLC is supposed to protect you. A trust is supposed to protect your heirs. Well, there's no protection from an LLC unless you have partners, and I can go on about that. But the trust sets your kids up for absolute failure. If they're involved with the rentals and they understand keeping reserves and they understand cash flow and they understand future expenses and they know how to deal with tenants and they understand leases, have a trust. But if you're like my brother, who has 10 paid off properties, and up until 2 years ago, his two kids, who are in their 30s, had no properties, had no interest in his rentals, and he set up a trust. If he passed away without a trust, the properties would go to probate. They would be
Mm-hmm.
sold. The government would take their share, but would use the stepped up basis to reset depreciation, capital gains, and they would get a chunk of money. They would get a chunk of money. If they inherited a trust, they don't have the reserves. They don't
Mm-hmm.
understand the cash flow. They don't understand that if this trust wasn't set up right, I don't get the stepped up basis. And now they
Yeah.
have all of this capital gains or depreciation recapture. And they're probably going to file bankruptcy and lose the properties and walk away with a ton of debt instead of the money that could have came from probate. Now, my nephew has a rental, is a homeowner, is looking for his next rental. If my brother passes away, there's a chance he'll run the trust successfully. But there's so many landlords I know whose kids are just completely hands off, not interested. I have a daughter that I believe is a socialist, has the all cops are ACAB printed on everything, and doesn't want anything to do with it. There is no way that she would handle a trust as well as she would handle a lump sum of money from probate. And
Yeah.
I know it sounds dumb, but sometimes a trust can be a bad idea for some investors' kids.
Yeah, it's not one size fits all. You always have to ask why. Um, Speaking of trusting people and trusts, one we didn't bring up because I thought it might be too obvious is, the most costly expense is a bad tenant. The second is obviously vacancy that I brought up, but just making sure with all of this trust stuff, this tenant who's moving into your property is who they say they are. They objectively qualify. They will be paying the rent on time, and they are not going to cause significant nightmares and headaches for you.
Yeah, I think we had a video probably 2 or 3 months ago where we had the red flags on tenant screening.
Yeah.
And it's the
Yep.
ones where they reach out and they say, hey, do you have any units available for my friend? Which means they don't qualify or they don't meet the criteria. Or if you see a response that says, are you a property management company or a private manager? Do you manage self-manage? Because they're looking for
Yeah.
somebody they can walk all over the emotions of. And there's a long list of reasons. And I think it usually happens when somebody has a vacancy for a month or a month and a half, and the owner starts to get a little desperate thinking I'm paying the mortgage payment. And so they'll just take anybody. And I'll paraphrase, but this is from Richard Branson from Airlines. He says, it's better to have a hole on your team than an a-hole on your team. And so the
I love that.
landlord that gets desperate and just has to get a tenant in there is going to get tripped by missing red flags.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that.
One of the mistakes I see people make often as landlords too that I interact with is, and this is gonna, so I'll say it, I'll sound like a jerk, and then I'll explain why. A lot of people who self-manage set themselves up for failure by not starting evictions immediately when it's legal. Makes me sound like a jerk. Kick the tenants out at the first possible opportunity. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if the rent's due on the first It's late on the after the 5th. On the 6th, if your tenant has a real life thing and you have built a relationship of trust and you know somebody passed away or there's a health concern, you can be human and work with them. But on the 6th, when the tenant is just looking at their list of bills and they think, if I don't pay the cell phone bill, they take it away. If I don't pay internet, I can't work from home. If I don't pay for my car, they repossess it. Maybe this landlord has a bunch of emotions on their sleeve that I can walk all over. So I do two things. And this has caused me to not have one late or missing rent payment in almost a decade now. My first year didn't go so well. I had to learn these skills. But in a decade now, almost 11 years, I haven't had one because of two things that I do. The first thing, if the rent's going to be late, I tell a tenant, look, we have a lease. It's in place. You are allowed to pay the rent late. Here's how the late fee structure works. And on the day after the grace period, I'm filing an eviction to help you.
Yeah.
Because there are rental assistance programs that will not talk to you as a tenant until you've been served with these papers. So that's the first step. I follow this procedure with everybody. It's universal. The second thing is I explain the math of time to the tenant. I say most months you have about 4 weeks to get the rent together for next month. If you pay the rent a week late this month, it makes this month easy, but then only gives you 3 weeks for next month. It starts a spiral that will end in you getting evicted. So having those two conversations, yes, you can pay it late. You will get eviction paperwork on the 6th. And now you're setting yourself up for failure because of how time works. The many times tenants have reached out and said, hey, here's my issue. Can I pay the rent late? We have that conversation. So far, they've always decided to pay it on time.
Yep. Yeah, I love that. I think it only hurts a tenant when you give them flexibility because they're going to be late the next month. They're going to be late the next month, and then they're not going to have a home. And so it's better to hit it head on before they get so far down that there's no way they can pay you. You feel like they've done something really wrong to you. They are losing their home. It's a terrible situation. It's better to hit it head on and say you need to have your finances aligned, or we need termination on this, and you need to move somewhere you can afford. So I love that one so much. On evictions, here's another interesting one that's come up. Especially I find it in California and New York. Tenant landlord law. Okay, in Seattle too, you'll have Chicago. Tenant landlord law is quite crazy in these states. And for whatever reason, I found some landlords think they are above the law. In other words, like there's fair housing, and it's like, here's the exact process you need to follow, or the exact process that is being followed in the program that we send all of the applicants over. You first come, first serve. We don't auto do background and credit checks on everyone because of these laws. And I've seen some landlords come and be like, yeah, well, it's my decision. I can choose whoever I want for the property or this or that. It's like, no, but that's not how the law works. You have to work within the law. And that I have seen get, because obviously lawyers are super expensive. Any cases are super expensive. It's like you need to follow this, and this is why things are followed in this direction. The same thing with repairs. It's like, well, I don't want to do that repair because I don't have enough money in my bank account. It's like the tenant doesn't have any heat. So you actually do have to do this repair because by law, you need to do this repair. And so I think there's some things there where, the owner, the landlord is the decision maker. And that's how it works on Hemlane. They make all their decisions, but there are some guidelines and rules you have to follow, which is both your state, local legislation, your state legislation, and also the country, the US, and what HUD has to say. And so I think just making sure you're educated on that. And if you don't like the tenant landlord law in your area, great, purchase a property somewhere where you do. But that's your decision. You can't change that.
Two things before I get to my last one that I think when landlords make this one, this costs them tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of
Okay.
dollars. But the first thing is I am switching my portfolio over to the Hemlane platform. I'm generally doing it when I acquire a property or when I have a tenant turnover, or if I have uh, tenants that as I interact with them, I understand that they have smartphones and they use the internet. Like I've got a tenant who has a flip phone, no internet. I'm not going to bring her onto the Hemlane platform. And the main reason I do it is there's the free version to kind of get an understanding of how it works.
Yep.
There's the version that I use that just lets me self-manage it, lists my properties, Uh, I could, if I wanted to, because I've built a relationship with several handymen, but you have the access of a tier up to have access to the handyman network. But there's the most important thing is I just spent about a month in Portugal. I'm heading to Yellowstone, then I'm heading to Scotland, then I'm going to be in Thailand for the winter. I'm able to do that because if I have a tenant turnover, I could step up the tier of service for
Mhm.
that period of time if I have the tenant turnover when I'm not in the country. And then after the tenant turnover is handled, I can go to the tier that I normally stay at. That's what gives me the ability to go, I can travel and self-manage my properties. So go to hemlane.com. You can email Dana, Dana, at hemlane.com. If you use the code Dion Talk,
Yep.
it gets 20% off the first year. There's a link in the description below to just click on it to use that to get that discount. The second thing I want to cover, if anybody's coming to BiggerPockets Convention 2025, so if you're in Futureland, hopefully I saw you there. It's October 5th, 6th, and 7th at Caesar's Palace. You just go to biggerpockets.com to book tickets. If you use the code Dion50, you get another $50 off the price of going. There will be a lot of presenters there I'm looking forward to see, as well as I'm the keynote speaker on the last day, and I'm on a couple of panels the first day. And for everybody who can't make it to the actual event, there will be a lobby con at Caesar's Palace for people to connect and get to know each other who aren't going to the event. Uh, my last one, this is one that trips up a lot of landlords who have a couple of rentals and don't really get into the business. Like they're so focused on their job, they just have rentals as a thing for something in the future. I have seen landlords not take all of the depreciation because they say that one, I don't want to have to recapture the depreciation when I sell, or two, I want it to look like I'm making money so that I can get another mortgage. Both of those aren't the way it works. First, to get another mortgage, I'm carrying forward a loss. I've carried a forward loss every year on paper as a landlord. I made over $242,000 last year in profit, but I'm carrying forward a loss for next year to use against my taxes because of the depreciation I'm taking. But if I go to buy property and I want to get a mortgage, the lender takes out the depreciation and to look at your cash flow because that's a paper loss. It's not an actual loss. So not taking it doesn't benefit you with lenders. And the IRS assumes, we all know what happens when you make an assumption, all depreciation was taken, whether you filed for it or not. So if you go to sell, you have full depreciation recapture, even if you didn't take it. So don't do that. That's a very costly one.
I love that one so much. I didn't think about that one and I'm kicking myself, Dion.
Do you have one last one? And then I have a question from the chat for you.
Great. Go, you can go ahead with a question and then I'll give my last one.
Okay, the question from 24 Hills. Howdy, welcome to the channel. Hey Dana, I only have one rental. Is paying for Hemlane affordable for one unit?
It is. You have a starter plan that's free. And then you can go up. I truly believe if you have one rental, you actually need Hemlane more than anyone because you need structure in your process and you need a process and you don't have one. And so we'll help you put that in place. Things such as making sure you have the right background and credit check with income verification, making sure that you are advertising everywhere where you should, making sure you have lease renewals, like all this stuff intact. Really, it's the adding that structure for you. So, I always say with anything, when you get started, it's hard because you're trying to learn all the processes, but then it gets easier to scale. So definitely I would encourage if you have one, we have a starter plan you can get started with, but from there be able to grow and scale. I think Dion, the last one, especially with landlords, is just be able to track your numbers and how your property is performing. I've seen so many times where someone is stuck in the wrong investment and all they have to do is 1031 it and they have the right investment. And so I would encourage you to know how is your property doing or your portfolio doing. It will reduce that anxiety of should I be in this or not by understanding, having some benchmarks of how it should be doing, how it's performing against others, and then 1031ing if it's not working for you.
I'm a big fan of figuring out which assets are performing and which ones aren't. And it's not something I get from real estate. The last few years, I was demoted down to the president of the company that I worked at a CDL school, training truck drivers. And I really just had it drilled into my head as I was being demoted into that position. What is measured can be improved.
Yeah.
And if you don't know the numbers, you don't know what to focus on. And I have a video that came out not too long ago on 17 things you can do to increase your cash flow that isn't raising the rent. And so there's a lot of things that you might not know to do unless you're looking at those numbers. As far as, and the question from 24 Hills on if you have one rental, should you use something like Hemlane? The way I look at it is I want to treat my rental portfolio like I have 100 properties when you only have one. Treat your properties like you have 100. Treat your tenants like you only have one. So make the tenants feel important, communicate with them,
Yep.
understand the situation. But when you have that one property, you might go work on the fence. You might go swap out the light. You might go swap the door. You might go do the painting. You might go put in LVP flooring because you just have one rental. If you're doing that much work on one rental, your brain is going to say, don't add any more. This is too much work. Imagine if you doubled this. But if you had 100, let's say you mentally think I have 100 properties. I'm not going to go switch out a light bulb in the hallway or a high hallway or something. I'm going to hire a handyman to go do that. I'm not going to go clean out the gutters. I'm going to hire a company to go clean the gutters. I'm not going to go put in the flooring. I'm going to hire that to be done. So my brain is going to say it takes a couple of phone calls or maybe an email or maybe a trip to a store to manage my rental portfolio. I will absolutely double or triple or quadruple that to get away from my W-2 job.
Yep.
The more your brain says it's just one rental, the more work you're going to do yourself and you're going to limit your growth.
Yeah.
So if you put it on Hemlane, and here's just a really quick example. If you're just starting out, you got that one rental, which congratulations, 24 Hills. That's more than 90% of real estate agents ever do. They never own one rental property. And so you just say, I only have one. That's a huge accomplishment. So that's cool. Let's say you want to list a rental. Your one rental, tenant moves out. Do you know in your market which platform performs the best? Is it apartments.com? Is it Zillow? Is it Trulia, PadSplit? Is it Facebook Marketplace? Is it your whatever format you would put it out there? How much work would it take you to put it onto 15 platforms? Versus one of the reasons the lazy landlord has Hemlane for my properties is I'm switching people over. I put the information in once. It goes onto all 15 platforms. Now I do see up until about 2020, apartments.com was the leading platform in the Pacific Northwest.
Mhm.
Since 2020, it's been Zillow. I
Yeah.
want to say like 80% of my inquiries came through Zillow. I didn't have to do the research. I didn't have to go figure out where's the best marketing platform to use or do the work to put it on all of them. I put it in Hemlane. I hit a button, goes out on all 15 platforms. And then I have to sit back and filter through the demand.
And nationwide, Zillow is about 60% of the demand. So you get it's Zillow, Trulia, and Hot Pads, which are all the same company. But yeah, Zillow is definitely the dominant one there. And I think you're right. People I see far too often be like, well, I used to use PadMapper when I was renting. It's like, yeah, but that doesn't really show up, and that's not where people are looking today.
Nice. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, Danny. We'll have to do this again. I think the next one we might cover is that rent control just passed in Washington State, how this is going to triple my profits.
I would love to talk about that one, Dion. Thank you.
And we're off.
I always have so much fun with you.
I do too. These are great. And
Yeah. Do you have your speech yet for BP?